G'day and welcome to a very special edition of The Racket. The Racket is a joint broadcast specially made for the students and the staff at Torrens University Australia and Think Education. It happens on Facebook, it happens on YouTube. You can leave your comments and questions at any time in the chat boxes. Today, we are celebrating NAIDOC Week. Although it's not quite NAIDOC Week as we usually know it, because around Australia, many of the usual events and ceremonies that would be taking place this week are on hold, particularly as we continue to collectively deal with the impact of COVID-19. Now, our view at Torrens University was this, even though it's not officially NAIDOC Week, and although most of the events are on hold until November, we decided it's always important to keep conversations alive and going, especially when they're conversations to do with First Nations culture. And we are very proud to be presenting this edition of The Racket today for you. So the theme for NAIDOC Week this year is always was, always will be. And it's particularly important for us because we're beginning to develop a new reconciliation action plan. So this broadcast today is for our staff, it's for our students, it's for our community. It's a chance to listen, it's a chance to reflect. Now, firstly, I want to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land. I'm here today in Yarraville, in lockdown Melbourne. This afternoon, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of the Wurundjeri people, the Woiwurrung people, and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and especially pay my respects to the Kulin Nations because I've lived, fortunately, on Kulin Nations land between Ballarat, Point Lonsdale and Melbourne for my entire life. It's a beautiful part of the world. Proud to be broadcasting from here. Now, today we're going to be hearing 4 unique personal perspectives about what always was, always will be means. But first, before we do that, let me take you back to the start of this week. So Torrens University and Think Education helped stage a beautiful and poignant virtual smoking ceremony. And we did it for our staff, students and community. Check it out.
NAIDOC is a time for us to celebrate our culture, our histories, our identities to not just Aboriginal people in the community, but to also people around our nation as well.
It's about bringing our culture to the forefront and educating other people. All the health and spirituality of it, I think will better benefit everybody.
Is sharing culture, sharing our practices, our traditions. See, we abide by our old law. We follow them old protocols. We learn about connection to mother, and we teach that. We teach to respect, we teach to be thankful, and most importantly, we teach to give back. When we give back everything, because what the mother has provided us is our life. She's provided us everything that we have.
Scene was a creation dance about our 4 totem animals, right? Seen the goanna, the emu, the echidna, and the kangaroo. And that's our totem system, right? And that pays respect to that creation of them old ancestors and looking after country. Connecting and seeing the brothers all in one line, and that talks about strength, walking countries. So we as a people, no matter where we come from, need to walk in one line, connected together. You'll see them at the end when they put their hands on each other's back, and that's that strong connection, walking country.
Rochelle Morris is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander officer, and she's been with Torrens University and Think Education since 2018. Now, Rochelle, you organised a virtual smoking ceremony. We've just seen some of it. It was so beautifully organised. You must be feeling super proud of that, but also, why did you feel a need to organise a ceremony during this time?
I think for us at the moment, we're going through tough times with coronavirus, and obviously it's impacted on our community heavily as well as others. So normally NAIDOC Week is run in July each year. So for us, it's was just important to still acknowledge the week, considering that it has been officially moved to November. So just being able to still be proud of culture, proud of who you are, and utilising that virtual space, something that everybody's kind of on at the moment, which was such an important thing that we could do and bring community together. So there's been some really great responses to that as well.
And I mean, I've been rapt to receive countless emails from staff members and from students and also from community members, because like with this broadcast today, it's not just for our staff or students, anybody can tune in. And a number of them said, like, in the middle of lockdown, it just felt so special to be able to watch ceremony and to be able to be part of something like that again. In fact, I think a lot of staff found it very moving. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that struck people was that you had the local police there, you had the Illawarra men's group, you had some elders, and you even had a local state politician. Like, why was that important?
I think communities do very well in working in partnership with different organisations and as well as people like our police and our local MPs. So I think that for me that just was so important to showcase how we build relationships within community and showcasing that from a grassroots kind of perspective. So being able to have them on board with us for the smoking ceremony on Monday was fantastic to see how they worked in well with elders and with our men in community. But like I said, we live in such an interesting time at the moment where people are trying to find a connection to their own places where they live, and whether it be sitting inside a bedroom or a kitchen or a lounge room, just trying to connect to their own environment. Smoking allows for us to get outside of that normal space that we're in and go outside. So that's kind of how significant it was. Yeah.
And you must think it's pretty cool that staff members were watching it on Facebook and YouTube and still felt the power of the smoking ceremony, because for me it's often a visceral thing. It's about the smell and the land, but actually something worked still in the virtual version of it.
Yeah, virtually. I think for me it was totally different as well, because I'm used to obviously being there in the flesh and having a lot of people around. So it definitely the virtual space has created something totally different in the way that we connect, not just with Indigenous culture, but as humans at this point in time. So it was interesting to hear people's interpretation of that. So yeah, it was great to see.
Okay, so let me then set the scene. You are our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander liaison officer, and this is a huge job because this is an organisation with 19,000 students and 2,000 staff. Mm-hmm. And our students come from 117 nationalities. And I wonder up front, when people ask you the question, who are you and where are you from? How do you answer this question, Rochelle?
Yeah, I guess for me, my first and foremost thing is to say that I'm a Gumbenga Guri woman from North Coast of New South Wales. That's who I, define myself first and foremost. And then I'm Rochelle Morris. So my culture and my heritage will always play, priority in anything that I do in terms of introducing myself. So, and that is along the same lines of other Aboriginal people as well. So for me, that's the whole reason why I live, is to celebrate culture, and that's by my identity as well.
When we talk about having 117 nationalities in the student base, it's overwhelming every time I say that number.
Yeah.
If you had the chance, well, you do right now, to say, what does NAIDOC Week mean? Why is it important? How would you explain that to our students?
Oh, okay. I think for me, first and foremost, Aboriginal people in general in Australia, we come from different countries, we come from different nations, we all have different cultures and identities. So it does become very complex within our own community, and to acknowledge that we do come from different spaces. So for me, it's only a natural thing to kind of understand that we do have a different number of people from different nations. So, for us, it's just about acknowledging each other's cultures and identities and celebrating that not only just as an organisation, but for First Nations peoples as well. Yeah.
So we've got a number of guests joining us over this hour and a half, and I'm going to ask 3 questions of each guest. So let me start with you, Rochelle.
Mm-hmm.
What does NAIDOC Week mean to you personally?
NAIDOC Week for me just means a time that I can spend with family to reflect on good and bad times around things that may have happened within family, but most importantly to celebrate, our culture that has survived for such a long time, and we're continuing to better ourselves each year and keep on thriving. I think that's the most important thing for myself. And yeah, just being able to share that with other people as well, and just continually recognizing that we're still here and we're still surviving.
Surviving and surviving with pride and in some ways I think also thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And second question is, why is it always important that we collectively celebrate? Mm-hmm. So like, I'm really thinking that this is more than just Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islanders celebrating amongst themselves. This week is for the nation. It's for everybody. It's for the 117 nationalities. Why is it collectively important?
Yeah, I think for us historically as a country, I think we're in a time and place where we need to start having real conversations about Indigenous Australia. And I think, for us just being feeling safe enough to have real conversations and truth-telling conversations to get a lot of our, I guess, past histories out in the open and just acknowledging that. So I think for us, it's just really important to acknowledge Aboriginal people and just acknowledge the struggles that we've gone through and accepting those struggles as well. And then just reuniting together as a nation. I think that's the most important message. Yeah.
So, I mean, you'll be very familiar with the words always was, always will be.
Mm-hmm.
For some of our students and staff, this will be the first time they've heard this phrase. What does it mean to you?
It means to me that, like I said, we're surviving, we're thriving, but we never ceded, sovereignty. We never handed over our lands to, colonizers that came to our country. So we're still living and we're still thriving. So always was, always will be means to me that we are here. We're still surviving. We're still thriving. Yeah.
So starting from that position, I think regularly when I get up in the morning, I think we've got a responsibility to our students. And that responsibility in my mind is, how do we make sure our students feel connected?
Mm-hmm.
How do we make them feel proud? How do we make them feel knowledgeable? But most importantly for me, like I think about culturally aware, because to not be culturally aware, to my mind, means you're not placed in the world. And you can't understand yourself if you don't understand everything that's around you. How do you think we can do this as a school, as a university, as educators? How do we make students feel connected, proud, knowledgeable, and culturally aware?
Yeah, I think you touched on a good point, Bryce. Knowing yourself and just being able to be open to new experiences and new ideologies is most important. And I think for Aboriginal people, the way that we have survived for so many thousands of years, it's just as important to take on, the knowledge and the things that we've been able to kind of sustain over such a long period of time. But I think us as an organisation, ensuring that our campuses are reflective of our local, places where we're teaching, whether it's through the artwork that we use, whether it's through an acknowledgement, plaque on a building, or those simple things that make not just Aboriginal people feel connected to the place, but for all to feel connected. Those are the small things that we can start to do to recognise Aboriginal people, within those areas.
And now at the moment, like we are also having a bigger conversation, which is around how do we actually seed a reconciliation action plan that is going to inspire and perhaps provoke our staff and our students into action, into thinking about things in different ways. What does that work mean for you, and why is it important?
Yeah, I think some of the themes in what you've done, Bryce, in telling a story and about our journeys as like an organisation, I think that's no different to what we're trying to achieve with the RAP. It's about us building the foundations on how we can support, all of us to feel connected, but to build a story around a journey of us progressing into making, changes within our organisation and how we support not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but communities and staff members as well. So it's really about us just taking this opportunity to really create, a story and a journey about us being successful and how we support each other in this space. So that's probably the most important thing about a RAP, and being okay if we don't get it right the first time. That's the whole point. So we will make mistakes along the way, but at least we can acknowledge that through the journey that we take.
We have a growing number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, so it's about 350 and counting. Yeah. And I think that is a great beginning point, given we're a new university. And I know that you're doing amazing work with scholarships, like with the virtual yarning circles, with pastoral care, and also advocating for students really well. I wonder why you think it's important that we see more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students succeed in higher education. Like, what is it for you that's driving this conversation?
I think for me, because of my own personal journey through, education, it's just became more apparent to me that to be successful in society, sometimes I need to have, that education to get me through. But in saying that, there's a paradigm between education and cultural identity and how we mix the two. So it becomes a little bit more complex. But I think, the drive to show Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that they can be successful, if they do come and study in higher education, I think that's the key, and just supporting them through it, but just ensuring, that they're being supported culturally. I think that they're the most important things. But for me, it's just driving that. So because I know that people can succeed from having an education in general, personally. Yeah.
And what about your journey through education? Like, how do you tell that story?
Yeah, I have spoken about this before, but Mum, obviously Mum's part of Stolen Generation, and we were able to study at university together. So something, that is near and dear to my heart. So, seeing her be successful, despite all of the trauma that she has been through, and then going on to do a master's degree, and same, as her siblings as well that were removed. I think that's just given me so much inspiration to not only get myself through education, but to support other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that they can succeed despite any trauma that they may go through.
I just think it's phenomenal that you got to study alongside your mum, but also I imagine that might have been frustrating at times as well. I can just imagine trying to study alongside my mum and, have you got the assignment in yet?
Yeah, it was a little bit frustrating at times, but I mean, you get through it the best way you can. But I think, those are the things that will ever, forever be imprinted in my mind, and something that I can safely say, to people in the future, that I was able to do that with my mum, something that she was never able to do, as a part of being Stolen Gen. So, she wasn't able to have that connection with her mother. So it was exciting to be able to do that.
So your mum now has a degree herself. What's that degree?
So she has a Bachelor of Education, so obviously adult ed, but she's done postgraduate as well in trauma recovery as well. So she's done some really great things. Yeah.
And for you, like, the foundation is in education, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, that's where I've started. That's my foundation.
And I mean, I guess that, like, for your mum, that she must be looking at this right now as well, and looking at the work you do, and here you are in this new university, in this international university. What does that work mean? Leading a conversation in a very sincere and collaborative way, but actually within it, it's not just advancing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, although you're doing a phenomenal job of that. But it's also having an impact in other ways as well. Like, as we say, like, what does it mean for the students from Latin America who suddenly attend their first smoking ceremony? Like, this is phenomenal work, Rochelle. I really want to acknowledge that. We have collected some of the voices of our staff and students,
I think that's no different to
and we had a chance to ask them what NAIDOC Week means to them. So we've got this video, and I just want to throw to it now and show it to you, Rochelle. So this is our staff and students.
On how we can support, all of us to feel.
It's basically who I am and my culture. I am who I am today. I was the same yesterday, and I'll be the same tomorrow.
It's a very powerful message that is inclusive.
Our very own land that we live in, it was always belongs to our First Nation people. Like I am Aboriginal, but like I don't look like it. So it's like it's even hard for me to connect to feeling or saying that I'm Aboriginal because I feel like it's so complicated.
It's about us learning. It's about us listening and learning.
We come into this new land, and we participate in the activities, and we don't really understand the history of it.
65,000 years ago, before colonisation, our First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were the first artists, astronomers.
Acknowledging the past of the Aboriginal people.
We all have the same common core aspects and values of our life.
Farmers, explorers.
There's always some things that are not going to change.
We can learn so much from their adaptation and intimate knowledge of this land.
The link to country, the link to the elders, the importance of the story being fed down through families and into communities is something that I have lived in awe with for the last 30 years.
Always was, always will be.
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 So colleagues from across Australia and New Zealand, from our media design school in New Zealand as well. And you can also see a mix of students and staff there, including Professor Justin Bilby, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, who of course has done phenomenal work himself in terms of Aboriginal health and a lot of work in remote communities over years. How does it make you feel when you see like your colleagues and students articulating their own perspectives so beautifully? I was moved by it.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think for me, when I saw that, I was just felt very proud that all of the hard work, I guess, not just what I've done, but for what everybody has done, just to kind of connect to the things that I've been trying to do in this time that I've been here is it's really touching. It's really really touching to see. So I'm proud of what we've done so far. Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, it also drives, we are a school, but we're also a workplace.
Exactly.
And that actually, it's so important that we acknowledge culture and culture in all forms, but we begin with the first people. Now, we begin with First Nations perspectives, wherever we are in the world. So when we're in New Zealand, there is a context. When we're in PNG and when we're in Australia, in each instance. I would love you. I know you're very humble. Sometimes you're too humble for my liking. And that's okay, because that's one of the reasons why I do love you. But I want to imagine 5 years from now, we've been wildly successful in the work that we're doing. What does success look like?
Ooh, success for me looks like, well, first and foremost, I guess more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working for Torrens and us being, an employer of choice. But also having students want to come to be with us because we're culturally safe and we provide that space. But also, having international students feel like their learning has got more, they're learning more about Aboriginal culture, and that's, enhancing their learning. In terms of what they're being taught. So, there's a multitude of different things that we would like to see, successfully in the next 5 years. And I think, if we're really bold and creative and we can think outside the box and have strong people that can support and drive this journey, I think we can definitely make a difference for us here, definitely.
So we're going to, over the next hour, hear from some really wonderful guests right across Australia who are joining us. And if you are watching on Facebook or on YouTube, you can always leave comments or questions and we will answer them. Rochelle, we're going to come back to you in a wee bit, but thank you so much. And we're going to go now to Elissa Elvidge, who's a research affiliate at the Hunter Medical Research Institute and a PhD candidate at the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Newcastle. Now, her PhD research is about how an empirically validated cultural safety framework could work in New South Wales hospitals. And this is really around ensuring cultural safety from an Aboriginal perspective. Now, Elissa, where are you today? Where are you coming from? Where is this room we can see you in right now?
I'm at the University of Newcastle on their beautiful Callaghan campus on the land of the Awabakal Nation.
So I'm going to ask the same three questions that I asked Rochelle. First one, what does NAIDOC Week mean to you personally?
So NAIDOC Week to me personally, as a non-Indigenous woman of colour, it's about reflection, but it's also about action as well. So reflecting on the past, but also acknowledging that institutional racism still very much exists today in our society more broadly, but also in our social institutions, whether they be educational or health. And it's about what I can do in both my personal capacity and my professional capacity as an academic to, contribute to meaningful and positive change.
So the second question, why is it important that we collectively celebrate and acknowledge NAIDOC Week?
I think it's an important thing to do. I mean, given the context of, our history with colonisation, and also, the place that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people occupy in our country at the moment. I mean, it's important that we do it collectively, and I think we should do it not only, during NAIDOC Week, but, as part of our collective identity as well. It's something that we should be proud of, and it's something that I think we all have a responsibility to learn more about.
Okay, the words always was, always will be, what do they mean to you?
Again, I think it's about acknowledging and celebrating our rich history. I mean, we're so lucky to have the longest continuing culture in the world, dating back to over 80,000 years. That's something that's unique and that we should, be really, really proud of.
So I am always interested in how people get to the point where they go, I'm going to do a PhD, because usually there is a why behind it that is personal and something to do with the journey that the person's been on. So let's talk about this for a second. A cultural safety framework for New South Wales hospitals. I think that everybody on this call this afternoon would agree that is critical, because you need to be able to feel safe when you're in a hospital. But to do this from an Aboriginal patient perspective, what was the why behind your work and how did you get to this point?
Sure. So, I mean, I've always had an interest in culture and identity and racism, being biracial myself. I don't know, I feel like I kind of exist between two worlds where I have experienced racism, but also white privilege as well, depending on the context that I'm in. And I suppose the short version of that long story of what led to my PhD is that I call myself a bit of an accidental academic. So my main motivation for coming to uni was actually to get gigs for my band. So I went through a pathways program called New Step, managed to get a couple of gigs at the Bar on the Hill, which kind of kept me wanting to continue my studies. And I studied undergraduate psychology and sociology. I ended up doing honours in sociology, where I looked at anti-Islamic racism in the media and in daily life. And then after that, I worked in public health for quite a while on a range of different programs. But I really kind of discovered my passion for cultural safety when I was working on cultural redesign and looking at workplace racism. And I guess I just thought, well, an opportunity came up to do a PhD. I wasn't exactly sure what a PhD was when I signed up to it, let alone if I could actually do one. Just kind of took a leap of faith, and I've been very fortunate to have amazing supervisors who have guided me along the way.
So is the band still together?
No. I'm in semi-retirement now. Now that I've submitted my thesis, I'm having thoughts about maybe doing some collaborations. I do the occasional cameo with my sister, who's a Australian hip hop artist. Shout out to Lomas. And yeah, something I would like to do more of, I think.
Now, I mean, I think that you're working right now in terms of health, but you're also like knee deep within a university as well. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how is racism a barrier to someone's health and education?
Well, in terms of health and education, probably the first and foremost barrier is an access barrier. You know, being able to access health services, for example, if you or your family members have experienced racism going to your local hospital or community health centre, then of course you're going to be reluctant to go there and seek care. So I guess what happens is that when people do have these experiences, and I know through my own research, but also through the large body of evidence that we now have, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do experience racism at a very high rate when they access health services. So yeah, recognising that it can be an access barrier, but also once people are, at hospital, it can also act as not only a social determinant of health, where it can impact on people's psychological well-being and also physiological health as well, in terms of blood pressure and increased risks of other conditions. It can also compromise the quality of care that people receive.
So I always love asking people who are doing work like yours, if you're going to explain this to a 5-year-old, what does it mean? So a cultural safety framework for New South Wales hospitals, how would you explain that to my 5-year-old nephew Huxley, for instance?
Oh gosh, that is a tough one, Bryce. Well, I guess primarily cultural safety, it's about, it's anti-racism, essentially. It's a framework for, acknowledging people's culture, respecting people's culture and their needs, and that they might be different from the mainstream. But it's also about acknowledging the existence and the harm associated with the, inherent institutional racism that's throughout our social institutions. Now, sorry, that's probably not a 5-year-old answer. But yeah, cultural safety is about, I suppose it's different. I mean, you guys mentioned cultural awareness before, and I suppose the point of difference with cultural safety is that with cultural awareness or cultural competence, for example, it's about looking at other people's culture. But cultural safety, it's about us non-Indigenous people looking in the mirror and critically reflecting on our culture and, in an education or health context, what we bring to that in terms of cultural bias, assumptions, judgments, cultural norms, all of those sorts of things.
I imagine that we've got some academic staff, some of our frontline staff, at the university who are listening to this right now, and they are probably wondering to themselves, what can I do to provide a culturally safe and inclusive environment? And I think Rochelle before touched on something which I absolutely agree with. I would rather that we try something and get it wrong than not try anything at all. I'm a big advocate for what I call big glorious fuck ups, especially when you acknowledge them, and you do learn from them. But we are a university. We need to make changes ourselves as a workplace and as a school. So, for those staff, how can they start to bring that cultural awareness into their work?
I love that term. I think I'm going to have to use that.
You can use it in your PhD, you can have a big glorious fuck up in there if you like.
I will cite to you, Bryce. So we refer to those as teachable moments.
Good.
So it's about being courageous and I suppose, being open to reflect on yourself and being prepared for the fact that, you might be a bit uncomfortable with what, you find. Be prepared to make mistakes or F-ups, as you call them, Bryce. But yeah, if you approach your own, I suppose, cultural safety journey with cultural respect and the principles of humility and reciprocity, and yeah, just accept it's a given that you will make mistakes, but it's how you actually deal with and learn from those challenges. And yeah, look at them in terms of teachable moments. And just to address the first part of your question too, how can us as academics and more broadly higher education institutions, to me, I think the important thing with cultural safety is it's the action. So it's all well and good to have, fantastic artworks and policies and mission statements that say, let's be inclusive and culturally safe, but there need to be tangible actions that are attached to that. There needs to be accountability. And I suppose the take home with cultural safety is that it is determined in the health context by the patient, by the recipient of care. So if you're talking about cultural safety, it's important to have that meaningful dialogue with communities. And, if you get constructive criticism or feedback, reflect on that and listen to that.
Earlier this year with our staff and the students, I interviewed Natasha Stop-Despoja, and she made the point that's been well made, which is you can't be what you can't see. And so I think that the other part of this question around, creating a culturally safe school or workplace is that it's not just about increasing student numbers. I think Rochelle's point before is if we're going to be wildly successful, we want to see more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people saying, this is a place that I want to work. And seeing people in leadership positions who go, this is a place where I feel culturally safe to be myself and to bring my culture into the workplace as well. And I feel like that's the other thing which we hope we're working towards. Now, I understand you handed in your PhD last month, so big congratulations. Back to the pub and the band, I think. But what I'll put the question I put to Rochelle before, like when you think about the work that you're doing right now, what would wild success 5 years from now look like? First of all, for this thinking around an empirically validated cultural safety framework and what its impact is. And then secondly, for you and your work as an academic, as a thinker, as a leader.
Oh, I think in terms of the framework, obviously seeing improvements with closing the gap in terms of life expectancy, those sorts of things, but also what I referred to before, those differences in quality of care and access. I think those are huge indicators. They're definitely the critical indicators in the health context. And from I suppose, the university perspective, having institutions that acknowledge that, racism exists. It exists in our society more broadly. So of course it's going to be in our social institutions that are a product of our culture and society. So kind of starting from that premise, and I think that's a difficult thing to do, not only from an individual perspective, but from that organizational perspective as well, because once you actually expose the reality of racism, only then can you actually begin to dismantle those systems and embed cultural safety in a meaningful way.
Elissa, we're going to come back to you because we're going to bring all of our speakers together, but so lovely to have you coming from Newcastle. And we're now, for some reason, I feel like we're working our way up and down the coast in New South Wales because we're going to go from Newcastle back to the Illawarra now. We've got Josh Maurer there right now. So Josh, good afternoon. Here you are. There you are. Nice to see you, Josh. Where are you coming from today exactly?
I'm actually on Wadi Wadi. I'm on the Darrawal Nation in Shellharbour with the Wadi Wadi people.
A beautiful part of the world. And is that where you call home, or where is home for you?
Home to me, Cherbourg, so southeast west of Brisbane. So that's my country. I'm a proud Waka Waka man from Cherbourg.
And this, I was extremely embarrassed before because I said I didn't know where Cherbourg was, and everybody on the call was like, how do you not know that? So just give me a quick whack around the years. Where is Cherbourg and why is it important?
So Cherbourg, it's a well-known Aboriginal community, especially in Queensland. A lot of people in the education system know Professor Chris Sarah. He spent quite a lot of time in the education within Cherbourg, building a strong, connected community, especially focusing on culture and education for the Aboriginal people within that community. And that it wasn't that gave Cherbourg a name, but Cherbourg has also been quite well known, part of the stolen generation as well. So a lot of people were taken and put onto the mission in Cherbourg. And so when you see a lot of people from Cherbourg, it's a mission where there's people from all different communities that were brought together in Cherbourg. And that's a big significance to obviously all Aboriginal people are part of the stolen generation.
Now, your background is in primary and secondary school teaching, so you do have that education connection as well. Does that come from home, or where did that connection come from?
Yes and no. So I, as a student, as a lot of us are, I wasn't a fan of school. I was suspended every year at school. I'm with you. My turning point was in year 11. I had a modern history teacher, and I'll never forget her. I'd just come back from a suspension, and she said, "Oh, you're going to be another one of the Aboriginal kids that's never going to get an education. You'll be homeless, and you'll be on the dole." And from that point, my frame set was, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong. In 3 years, I'm going to be back at this school teaching. And 4 years later, I was a new graduate teacher at that high school and walked in and made my point. And it's funny, I thought I'd never actually get along with her. And today, she's now quite high up in Aboriginal education because I actually went back and we actually had a good conversation about what she did to me and how it made me become a teacher. And I wanted to share my story with those kids on how don't listen to one person. You need to go on your journey to see how you can educate the whole. And that's what I've done.
And did you end up teaching modern history? Did you replace her, or did you?
No. I was PE in secondary. So I did PE, then I retrained in primary education. So
look, I mean, it's also phenomenal, like us hearing Elissa before and yourself. It's really important to remind ourselves that in education, we're dealing with people who are in transit, like they're developing and they're growing. So like to make an assumption, I think is a very dangerous thing. You know, like I was also a kid who really struggled in the education system, really struggled through school. I always find it hilarious now that I'm on the executive of a university because, you know, I was like, I mean, my poor school teachers and the poor principal. But this is, you know, like we're at moments where young people often are at their most vulnerable and their most influential as well. Like you can influence how they're going to be. Your work has shifted somewhat. You're still dealing really, to my mind, with education and development, but in a whole different context now, working in and outside of the prison systems with young people, sometimes as young as 16, which you know, really sums up something about where we're at right now as a nation. Tell me about your work with the Illawarra Koori Men's Support Group and your work as a family support worker.
So my role, it's quite broad, especially within the Aboriginal community, being a family support worker. I'm like a dad, an uncle, a nephew, a counsellor, that kind of thing in my community. But with my role, I focus supporting Aboriginal men that are most vulnerable. So obviously they've either got drug and alcohol problems, they've been involved with domestic violence themselves, or they've come out of a custodial sentence, or they're looking at doing a custodial sentence. Especially with this pandemic that's been going on at the moment, we have seen quite a large number of cases of domestic violence. At my work at the Illawarra Career Men's Support Group, we run a program called Brothers Against Domestic Violence. We're one of the only Aboriginal organisations in the state that actually runs a cultural and holistic program for Aboriginal offenders towards domestic violence. So in that program, we sit down with them, we have a yarning circle, and it's pretty much to reconnect them into culture and give them strategies and techniques on how to deal with their emotions, their triggers, and what sets them off before they have that episode against their partner or family member or whoever it actually involves within the community. And coming from a cultural perspective, we found that that's working quite well, rather than being in a nothing against the hospital system or the healthcare system. We find that cultural setting, we're outside, we're on country, we're connecting to each other rather than that institutionalized setting in a room, white walls and a door behind you. So our boys would rather open up, and especially me being a young Aboriginal male myself, and the workers that do come, most of them are Aboriginal, but as you saw in the video from Monday, we do have a strong connection with the police force in Lake Illawarra and our members of parliament, because we've seen we need to build that capacity within the community with the police force, especially with what's going on in the media at the moment. The cops and our young fellas and our men, they're building that rapport, they're breaking that cycle, they're breaking that chain, and that's what it's all about in the 21st century. We need to break that to work together in a holistic community, and that's my goal. I just want to work in a harmonious community where we all get along, where we all can share culture, we can all share knowledge. But yeah, that's a long shot, but that's where we're working towards.
Scott, I've got a tattoo that means a lot to me. I've only got one tattoo, and it says you get proud by practicing is the tattoo.
It's so true.
And I think that, like, knowing a little bit about the type of work you're doing, one of the challenges is you'll be meeting young men who are not proud, who are ashamed, who are hurting, who
Definitely.
might not have a connection at this point with culture or country, might not even know what their connection is. Can you tell me, how do you keep yourself healthy and well? Because it is a tough environment.
Very, very tough. So it's funny, obviously we're dealing with clients that are most vulnerable. It sort of does bring up triggers from the past. Obviously the silent generation is close to my heart, with family being part of that. And especially with the stuff that's going on in the media at the moment. It's a tricky situation. Everyone deals with situations differently. At first, when I first started this position, I thought I was really strong. I thought I was strong enough to take it all on. And I could see myself sort of not having a breakdown, but I had to take a few steps back. Then I realized, like, you know what, Josh, you need to get on country. You need to go back and reconnect your culture. I've always been strong in culture with myself because that's been embedded in me from a kid. So I called up an auntie, went up the coast and had a few days on country. From that, she's then like, I've realized, you know what, once a week, twice a week, go to the beach, go for a walk, because the beach is only a couple of minutes down the road. Have that time to focus on you, forget work. But it's hard for me because I'm on call. So if a young fella or one of the men gets arrested, I'll get a phone call from them or the police station, or I've got to go down. So then it's quick, flick your home life off, put work mode on and go down. So I've now worked in my own mind. Okay, yep, this is my work mentality. This is my home life. And now I've started to listen to more podcasts and more meditation music, and obviously reconnecting to culture. That's my big thing, especially that smoking ceremony that you guys and Rochelle gave to us on Monday. That regenerated me. I was actually fortunate to take part in present, and I got cleansed, and it was good to have that feeling again, because obviously NAIDOC week's not this week, and we normally bombarded with smoking ceremonies in the month of July. And it's great because you get that cleanse. And I was like, you know what? The next thing, I'm going to come home and do some sage in the house to cleanse everything, because it's that inviting feeling. And I said to Rochelle, I was like, you know what? Thank you for choosing our workplace and our clients, because it meant so much to them as well, to give them that opportunity to have that cleansing and that reconnection to country.
And look, I mean, and I also meant it in the sense that I was watching it from a screen here, and it actually right now in the complex chaos of Melbourne this week, like where we've had, you know, those 9 towers locked up on like over the weekend, you know, the street 2 minutes away from me locked down, but I wasn't locked down. And then we're now, 288 new cases of COVID today. I couldn't believe that I found watching a video stream of a smoking ceremony so enriching. If you'd said to me that was it was going to have the impact that it had, I would have been like, no. But the other reason why it had the impact was because it was also like, it was a smoking ceremony. There was a moment where I think was it Uncle G, you know, like he was kind of just having a chat with someone, and we could hear that, and come on, you guys, you stand over here now. Like it had all of that other stuff that comes with the smoking ceremony as well. So it was a gift for all of us. It was Definitely. A gift. I'm going to ask you the 3 questions I've been asking everyone this afternoon then. So what does NAIDOC Week mean to you personally?
We come together as a community and show resilience to our families and the strengths as First Nation people, really. It's belonging, our shared history, our shared knowledge, and our shared culture. And that gives us that opportunity to share it with everyone, as we've got this platform, as we're all here today, from different backgrounds, different workplaces. And we get to share our own personal story and bring it together as one collaboration. And I think that's what the true meaning of NAIDOC is now going towards, because obviously with this pandemic, everything's going technology like this way, and it's a good way that we can all communicate in that way for NAIDOC.
What does always was, always will be mean to you?
Share time with family in that aspect. Like, as I said, I've had a history of the silent generation. So the land that we actually currently walk on, everyone laughs at me. So I've got, obviously you've got one tattoo, I'm covered in tats. So on my feet, I've got mum and dad. So as a kid, mum and dad would always say to me, footsteps in the sand. So wherever I walk, they walk with me. And so that to me is always was, always will be. My mum's Aboriginal, dad's German. So I've been brought up with Dreamtime stories and fairy tales. So that's my connection, always was and always will be home to us.
There's a strange number of German Aboriginals, isn't there? There's for some
Definitely.
reason the Scots and the Germans for some reason, and the Greeks, yep. I think as well. That's interesting. Do you mind if I ask about your mum, because I understand that she's also had a big influence in terms of your work as well?
Definitely. So my mum's passed away now, so she passed away 15 years ago. So she was quite influential in my life. So she, back in 1991, started the inquest into black deaths and custodies within Australia. So she started the research practice. So her PhD was on deaths in custody. So I've been brought up in the prison system as such. So my mum wasn't a prison officer. She was the educational side. So she actually opened up a jail for Aboriginal men up in Maurer, so far north New South Wales, for first chance offenders. And I could see how much compassion she had for those Aboriginal men and women in the prison system. And as a kid growing up, I thought to myself, do you know what? I want to have that heart. I want to give back to, I don't care what community I am. I just want to give back to my people, because what they've lost and what they've gone through, me coming up as a leader, hopefully being a leader, I want to give back to them. And from mum doing that inquest and that finding with black deaths in custody, starting back in 91, that was my passion. And obviously with that teacher, going back into education, now going into the prison systems and working with men that are vulnerable, I can see her looking down on all of us at the moment, guiding us in that path.
I mean, what a trailblazer. And I mean, it's important to say this at this point because we've, as I said right at the beginning, we've got 19,000 students and they come from 117 countries. And if they know one thing today, if they can remember one thing, and I've just got to read this to make sure I'm right, Aboriginal Australians are the most incarcerated people on the planet. So they make up 3% of the population in Australia, but 28% are prisoners. So why do you think in 2020 there is still such a disproportionate amount of people incarcerated?
It's a big question. A lot of our communities, obviously with stuff that was introduced back when we were colonised, the introduction of alcohol, the introduction of drugs, a lot of our people have been addicted to those substances because we can't get rid of it as quick as non-Indigenous people. They haven't given that opportunity for education. They're scared of going into institutions, as Elissa said. Yet we need to make those institutions culturally safe for our people to go in and feel comfortable with sharing their story. But then on the other hand, a lot of our services do have Aboriginal people in it, and our mob don't go in there because they're ashamed that, oh, I go in, sis will let the community know I've come in to get a health check. So it's that thing. So we've got to break that cycle for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women that are in that prison system. And you know what? A lot of them feel safer on the inside. They've got a bed, they're getting fed, and their family are in there. As you said, the percentage of our men and women incarcerated is quite high.
So, Scott, the other part of the question, which I led with earlier on, was it must be challenging in terms of working in this system, but there must also be moments where you feel an immense sense of pride and connection, because you do see young people, young men who begin to find their voice, re-establish themselves. Tell me, like, what does that mean for you, and what does it mean when you start to see those young men take different paths and take on different work?
Yeah, it's a perfect example. Obviously, I'm not going to mention names for confidentiality. We've had a young fella come into our program on a Tuesday who spent quite a lot of time incarcerated. And over the last couple of weeks since COVID, he's been turning up on a regular basis, been sitting down with me, my coordinator, and some of the elders, just having a yarn, just getting stuff off his chest. That was the first week. The second week he was doing the same. Then he started getting into art, started doing some paintings for us, and felt that connection to culture. And me and my coordinator were having a quick yarn, and we're like, geez, this fella's opening up, getting that stuff off his chest. And he's doing cultural practices, cultural programs, speaking to the elders, doing some artwork. And then by the third week, he's there 4 days a week. We couldn't shut him up, which it's not a bad thing. But do you know what? He felt so safe and comfortable talking to us, talking about his home life, talking about his kids, talking about what he's going to do on the weekend. And seeing a person come from being locked up to coming, will not shut up, that circle is so good to see, because sometimes you don't break that circle. If you've been institutionalized, a lot of people don't break it. They go back in, And from the programs that we run, Brothers Against Domestic Violence with them, it gives them that safe haven where they can feel come and safe with us and have that yarn. And that's what I find, especially with this fella. Hopefully it works for him, just sitting there having a yarn with the elders and us and getting stuff off his chest. And that's what some of us need, especially in the yarns that we're having today. It's going to help all of us, especially the students that aren't from here. As you said, they'll take one thing away from it.
Josh, we're going to come back to you. I called you Scott just then because I was having a mental blank and I was looking at a Zoom thing and it said Scott on your screen, but Scott's actually not you.
Well, good. I can be a Scott.
Well, yeah, I mean, German background, Scottish background, it's all relative, isn't it?
That's it.
So we're going to cross now to Rhianna Patrick. And Rhianna Patrick is a Torres Strait Islander media broadcaster with over 20 years experience. She doesn't know this, but I used to listen to her on Triple J, reading the news back 20 years ago. And and then was fortunate enough that our paths crossed, and she's really a phenomenal broadcaster in current affairs, in radio, in television, and also in Indigenous media. And her programs have been on ABC Radio, ABC TV, but not only that, she's also into all sorts of weird things like aviation and the Australian young adult fiction, the monarchy. She's follows the monarchy in rather strange ways, musical theatre, all sorts of things. So we've got a lot in common. Ree, it's a real pleasure to have you part of Torrens University and Think Education, and to have you here on this broadcast today. What does NAIDOC Week mean to you personally?
Oh, look, NAIDOC Week is just one of those things that I look forward to every year. And it's a time of getting to see people I might only see once a year, because they're at NAIDOC. I mean, we have in Brisbane, which is where I'm based, Family Fun Day in Musgrave Park in South Brisbane is the biggest day on the calendar for mob up here. And just going there and seeing people that I only really see there once a year, having a chance to be able to talk to them. We're also busy with work, so it's the one time we have. And just sort of being able to reconnect with community, I think, is the most important thing about NAIDOC for me, is that it's just that chance that you get to take time out of what would normally be a work day, to go and just be among family, be among friends. Maybe you meet up with some other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people you've never met before. It's all about the yarning, Bryce. For me, it's all about the chats.
So, as Josh said before, there's an incredible shortage of smoking ceremonies this July, as we've sort of put NAIDOC on a slight hold to see if we can do the week proper in November. But the theme, always was, always will be, actually has a history that is way beyond this year and this week. First of all, I'm going to ask you, what does always was, always will be mean to you, Rihanna Patrick?
Look, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. If you've ever marched, you know that that's how that sentence generally finishes. And for me, that's always a reminder, because as a Torres Strait Islander, I too am a visitor on the lands on which I live, and I live on the lands of the Jagera, Yugara and Yugrapul peoples, which is in the Ipswich region. And so for me, I'm always aware that I'm constantly a visitor here. So for me, that theme and what that means to me is having that awareness that I too am a visitor, and that I too am here paying my respects to Aboriginal people whose lands I work on, whose lands I've prospered on, and also whose lands that I live on. So that's kind of first and foremost what I think of when I think of that theme. But I think in the general schemes of the things that I've been thinking about, I mean, NAIDOC Week comes from a very political place originally. And so for me, with what's been happening with the pandemic, what's been happening in a lot of the states and territories across this nation, and also in a lot of the different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations at the moment who are trying to keep their old people safe, who are trying to keep themselves safe. For me, I think it's also reminded me just in a more obvious way that it might not have in the past, where I have been thinking about this stuff, but thinking about it a little more in the context of what's going on in our lives at the moment. And I think it's the fact that the struggle continues. The struggle hasn't just ended. The struggle is something that is seen across all facets of our lives, no matter how obvious that may be, when there's something happening on a global scale, but it also filters down to exactly what Josh was saying, that there's this change, that there's this struggle that's happening at the grassroots level that you're aware of in your community, that you're aware of among your family and among your friends. And, when I think about particularly as a Torres Strait Islander, what that means to me in terms of that struggle, I think about the 1936 maritime strike in the Torres Strait, where 70% of Torres Strait Islanders went on strike for better pay. Then I think about World War II with the Torres Strait Light Infantry Battalion, which my grandfather was a part of, and him and others leading a strike for better pay yet again. And then I think about what's currently going on with my dad and stolen wages, and him trying to right or wrong, which involved my grandfather, my grandmother, and also his own wages prior to the 67 referendum. So for me, I think there's a lot that I've been thinking about at this time in isolation, because that struggle continues on so many different levels, and it can mean a lot of different things. But once you drill down into the lives of what's going on in Rochelle's life, what's going on in Josh's life, what's going on in my life, that struggle is what is the thread that runs through, I think, all of that, which is why it's so important that we remember what always was and always is, and what always will be Aboriginal land.
Rish, I'm just thinking right now, Ree, that you're also blessed as a Torres Strait Islander, because it's like a sort of reverse aging. I've known you for a long time, and there's something about Torres Strait Islanders where you just don't get old. Like, when I said it's a 20-year media career, I mean, like I've got to work really hard to look like this now, and you just look, you beam and you're so beautiful, and it's like a reverse aging. I say that because you've actually been in newsrooms covering events for over 20 years, which is an incredible thing to now say about yourself and your work. So you're watching the Black Lives Matter movement right now resonate with so many Australians and people around the world. Is this different? How is this different?
Look, I've been, I think, watching quite closely what's been happening. I feel like it's been the last sort of maybe 3 or 4 years that there seems to be this real shift in non-Indigenous people wanting to know more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia, wanting to know more about traditional Aboriginal knowledges. And it's something that I've just been watching, and it's anecdotal. I don't have the research like Elissa does on this, but I think there's been a shift. There feels like there's been a shift. There feels like there's been a change. So with the amount of support that has come up with the Black Lives Matter movement, I don't think, been surprised by that. I think I've been maybe surprised about the number of people who are talking about it, the number of people turning up at marches. But I do wonder about what the momentum will be after that. Will this momentum continue? Will there be active change? And I think that's the interesting thing with Black Lives Matter, and where it started with obviously the death of George Floyd, just as an example of that is only one life that we have been talking about for a very, very long time. But for some reason, that has sparked what we've seen around the world. And I think those of us who are old enough and who were around at the time, I mean, we all thought that maybe what happened to Rodney King in the 90s and everything that happened in the LA riots, that was the catalyst for something then as well. But yet we're back here in 2020 talking about this yet again. And of course, that's just the African-American experience that we're talking about. It doesn't mean to say that we have not been talking about this from an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspective, that we have not been talking about this from an Indigenous other people's perspective, because we know what's happening to our Indigenous brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles overseas, and what they've also been going through. So I think for me, the thing that has intrigued me the most about this is that we've moved a bit. At the moment, we seem to have moved from not only what it initially was as a Black Lives Matter movement, and that movement is still there, but there's been a bigger call for change. But that change has now moved to a dismantling of the system, a closer inspection of what those systems are that are in place, an understanding of how those systems work across, whether it's the industry that I work in, whether it's the industry that Elissa was talking about, where her research sits, or whether it's the work that Rochelle's trying to do within Torrens University. That I think that call has been the thing that has made me kind of look at what's been happening a little bit more, because I don't feel like we've had the call of talking about a dismantling of the system, a dismantling of those systems, and introspectively looking at how all of that plays out. So I'm hoping that looking at how you can change a system, how you can embed an Indigenous knowledge system, how you can move to a mob-based design approach, how that might play out in the coming months, the coming year, because I think that's the action. We all talk about action and seeing what actually can happen when people get behind something like this. And I think that we always say, you know, you can talk the talk, but you need to walk the walk as well. And that walk is about making active change. It's not about, will we be having this conversation again in 20 years' time? Will we be talking not only about 432, 36 deaths? I mean, that number continues to go up since those numbers were put together, that in 20 years' time, are we going to be talking double that number? What is it that we can do at this point in time? And I think that's why I was interested in coming on here and listening a lot to what Rochelle had to say as well, and what you've had to say, Bryce, because I think in the university that you work in, something that is such a new thing, and one of the newest universities in Australia, you have a fantastic place at the moment to be able to interrogate what it is that your university does, how your university operates, and this change and this dismantling of the system that is being called out from all different aspects of other communities and other industries and other sectors. So I can see that you are actually at the start of, I think, a really interesting journey where hopefully we'll get to see what that means. And hopefully in 20 years' time, we'll be talking about this moment right now of where Torrens University was when they started looking at how they can change that system.
I've never heard mob-based design approach, and I love that. So what MBDA, that's the mob-based design approach. I do also think about it in terms of, because, you know, I've done a lot of strategic planning work and a lot of work in advocating for community organisations across all sorts of contexts. But there was an aha moment for me working with a key First Nations arts organisation when, like, I was helping to facilitate a strategic plan, and the strategic plan became a set of circles. And, you know, a strategic plan is often quite linear, right? That there's a vision, there are values, there are tactics that are going to lead to the objectives, and you know, and then there'll be key measures. But this was actually a set of circles. And I think that there's something in this, a mob-based design approach, because I'm a little bit like Paul Keating. I know I'm bleeding heart here, but I feel like Australia is actually capable of it. So I hear the struggle, and I get it, but I also think, like, we're actually capable of, you know, it's an overused word right now in the pandemic, but leading a pivot from within and going down the mob-based design approach line. It's of course heartbreaking though, Ree, as well, because you can see how capable we are of it. So when we don't do it, it becomes even more hard, I think, as well.
I think you're right, Bryce, about, you know, you've actually just encompassed what Josh was talking about earlier, which is about the holistic way that we as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander think about our approaches to what it is that we do. So it's interesting that you mentioned it's more linear from what you know, where you normally stand to what you've seen, where it is about encompassing everything.
Absolutely. Now, I quote you regularly, as you probably know, and I did say to Rochelle, and I'll have to admit it because she probably thought I invented it, but I didn't. I stole it from you. I was like, Rochelle, be careful, don't become the Black Oracle in this organisation. And you've you know, talked openly to me and others about how it's difficult. You know, like suddenly you go, oh, we've got Rihanna here around the tables. Oh, now our Black issues are sorted for us. Fantastic, tick. And there is a very real conversation in terms of media and broadcasting in this country right now, which is, you know, like, is it actually culturally safe? You know, like, what are the structures behind newsrooms? What are the structures behind organizations? I wonder if you can just touch on how you're making sense of it right now, and how you manage yourself with this, because this is not easy right now. It's bringing up a lot.
Yeah, I think it's something that as an Indigenous person that works in media, it's something that definitely a lot of my Indigenous colleagues and I have been having conversations about, that we might not be directly involved in what might be happening in terms of the reportage around Black Lives Matter, but we have been talking about what it has raised for us, those feelings that we are having, what we're currently going through, and not really trying to make sense of that, because I think you can't really make sense of that. When trauma raises its head, it's not a time to be trying to make sense of that. It's a time to just accept what it is and try to move through that, and understand what it is that is happening. But I think it's also been, you know, a time where thinking about your place. You know, I have a national program on ABC Radio every Sunday night. And although I might be a Torres Strait Islander broadcaster in that space, a lot of what I talk about is very much non-Indigenous. It's non-Indigenous from books to, sometimes the playlist that I have. Although I did just celebrate NAIDOC Week with an all-Indigenous playlist, as I normally do, even though NAIDOC has been postponed. I'll just do it again in November. It's perfectly fine. But, I have been questioning about, in the position that I have, by not saying anything around what's happening with Black Lives Matter, am I also a part of the problem? What is the place that I have in having that conversation in the education of the audience that tunes in on a Sunday night, but also thinking more about why it was that I got into media in the first place, Bryce. It was about having a Torres Strait Islander voice involved in that. It was about bringing voices for Indigenous Australians into that realm. And so I think it's also challenged some of us in this space to think more about why we originally got into what we got into.
And Ree, you also at the same time have this audience that needs to hear these stories as well. And yet I come back to my own ABC days, we've always got that thing where I've got to be independent, not meant to bring your own personal bias into the work, but you can't separate, to my mind, who you are in this moment. And there are also some things where there is not balance. For me, climate change, I'm not interested in denial anymore. I don't want to present, and similar for me in terms of the Black Lives Matters moment. I actually don't think there is another side to present. But it's drummed into us as journalists, isn't it? As broadcasters, you're meant to, have the two perspectives there. How do you manage that? And can you manage that?
It's a hard one because you're absolutely right. But I think the thing that gets forgotten perhaps when you are an Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander journalist, broadcaster, working in media, is that you don't switch yourself off. You don't switch off the indigeneity after you've finished on a story or before you go into a story. you are looking at everything that you do through an Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander perspective, through an Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander lens. So for me, it's, I suppose, making your non-Indigenous colleagues aware that you don't just switch this off and get on with your life, because generally what you're reporting on or what you're looking at or the things that you're talking about directly affect your life. That is your reality for you. It's not something that's at an arm's length. It's, you might know, you might have a sister, you might have a brother, you might have an uncle, you might have a nephew who's involved in one of the many things that you might be talking about. So I think it's, it's sometimes hard, because I wonder if there was a way of being an expert with your indigeneity, whether that would change things. Because I feel that if I had a degree in economics and I was doing economics news, perhaps that would be taken more seriously than if I'm an Indigenous journalist doing Indigenous news. And that is, and I'm not saying I'm an expert, because that's not how it works. I'm a young person. That is something that is a lifetime journey to become. But if I was to put it into a Western context of being an expert, would I then have, my colleagues who would, think that that is an expertise that I bring to what it is that I do, not just something that, oh, well, it happens to be within me, so therefore I bring it to what I do anyway. I always wonder about what that would mean if there was a way of being able to show how much of an expert you were on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues, because I think it's sometimes that isn't taken into account by colleagues or by those that you work with, that it's not just an easy thing. There's a lot of complexity in being Indigenous. There's a lot of complexity in the way that you work within your community, whether that's your own community or the broader community in which you live. You have to have a way of working. You have to know what is the proper way of working. And you also have to know those protocols for where you are when you are working.
I'm going to open up now to all of our guests. We've got Josh back, Elissa and Rochelle. It's been an absolute privilege to have you on the Racket, talking to students and staff and community from Torrens University and Think Education. Ree, you're going to know this activity because I do it regularly, where we sit in a circle and I get everybody to answer a question to actually finish a sentence right now. So, Rochelle, you've been listening to Elissa, Joshua, and Ree this afternoon. What's one thing that you're beginning to realise now after listening to this conversation?
I guess just touching on that point that you mentioned earlier, Bryce, about me being this humble person in the role that I play, working with Torrens University, I think, listening to everybody, on the panel today, it's really encouraging that, I can turn that around and be myself and be proud more in the workplace in terms of how I express myself in pushing forward our agenda, Bryce. It's a difficult conversation for me personally to have with people, is that I don't want to be that angry Black person or that angry Black woman or be tagged like that. So, for me, it's whilst I am humble, there are reasons behind why I'm being humble, but, I can feel safe that, if I were to be myself in all reality, there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah.
Ree, I just saw you nodding, like, so hearing that, like, what are you beginning to realise?
I think I'm beginning to realise that in the current climate that we find ourselves, that change is possibly inevitable. And that hopefully that change will also cross over to real change and not just talk of change. But I think I'm also starting to realise that perhaps while having Indigenous voices within mainstream media is important, that maybe it's more important for our own media to be given front and centre when we talk about these issues and these conversations, and whether the place of Indigenous people in media is the capacity building of that sector for the future.
Joshua, for you, what are you beginning to realise?
That in all sectors that we're all currently working in, that yes, we have come a long way, but we also have that long journey ahead of us that we need to share that path together. Don't walk by yourself. Always have that person in front of you, behind you, and next to you, so we can work holistically together. That's coming from it. That's the way I can sort of see us all going, is a journey together.
Elissa, what are you beginning to realise?
Oh, I guess that, there is that sense of a paradigm shift in society. And that, from a non-Indigenous perspective, that it's, the onus is on us to contribute to that positive and meaningful change. And that, there is, I'm an eternal optimist, but I do get the sense that, there is a critical mass. This webinar is an example of, having those champions in social institutions. So, I think there is hope for the future, but it's a tough road ahead.
Ree, you posed a question around, like, is your role to stay in the mainstream media, or is it to strengthen Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander media? And, that presents an interesting conundrum even for a university as well, because when I think about, should we attract the best and the brightest educators, for instance? Well, there are great Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleges and education institutions as well. I mean, is there a way that, if you like, the mainstream organisation can actually meaningfully, culturally safe, in a culturally safe way, collaborate with Aboriginal media well? Is there a way that, this can happen? Can you see that future? Or at the moment, is it more about what you need to do, which is about strengthening Indigenous media?
That's an interesting question, Bryce. I think the way that I look at it at the moment is that we've kind of seen that collaboration over many years. If we think about the starting up of the Central Australian Aboriginal Media Association, CAMA, for instance, and what that gave us to where we are now with NITV. We've got an anniversary coming up very soon for Koori Mail, which is one of the premier Indigenous newspapers in this country. But I wonder if it's no longer about collaboration as such, that a lot of us have come through, we've worked in mainstream, we've gathered the skills that we need. But I also wonder if it's about what are we missing skill-wise in that sector? What is it that could really impact our sector the most if we had that skill, and it would allow us to do something we're currently not doing? And so I've been having a lot of thoughts and conversations around what that could look like. Because for me, I wonder what it would look like if the power was shifted, if Indigenous Australians only gave their stories to Indigenous media in a way that we knew that it would be taken with care, that we knew that those stories would be told the way that they needed to be told from the start, of what that could look like if we completely change the power dynamic in that space.
Elissa, this then becomes an interesting conundrum then for academics, because obviously if you follow that principle through, perhaps there should be a similar principle in terms of research and in terms of teaching as well.
Absolutely. I think there's a strong case for that. I mean, and you are seeing some examples of that with, here at Newcastle University, we have an Indigenous health unit. We have the Wallatuka Institute, where it's staffed by, all Indigenous staff. And I think that is a definite way forward.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I'm not as good a radio broadcaster as Rhianna Patrick. I'm terrible at timing out right now, I've got to tell you. So look, Joshua, I want to say thank you and acknowledge your work, but also how beautiful it was at the beginning of the week. And Rochelle, I do think we need to make sure we keep the connection up with the Illawarra men's group, and also ask the question where and what we can do in terms of meaningful support from an educational perspective. So I do want to take that opportunity, Joshua, but say thank you and all power to your work. Elissa, it's so great to hear that perspective, but also great for the staff. We've got a lot of young academic staff. We've got a number of staff who are doing PhDs as well. And I think they'll take a lot from this conversation. Rhi, I consider you a national living treasure on a whole lot of levels, but also it's right now, you are just so spot on and so clear and like a moral compass to listen to. So thank you so much. But Rochelle, I'm going to come to you for the last words right now, because you do have the microphone. This is talking to student, staff, community. Always was, always will be. Rochelle, this is your space.
Yeah. So I guess just wrapping up, always was, always will be. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have survived for such a long time, and just really thankful for the organisation just being bold in actually allowing us to have this conversation, Bryce. I think being a relatively new university, I think we can do more of these and start having more truth-telling conversations with the organisation and staff and students. So let's keep on moving.
We will absolutely keep on moving. Thank you. We're out of here for now. I'm going to keep this jumper on forever until the lockdown finishes. See you all maybe in person 2 years from now at this rate. We continue. So that's the Racket for us. See you again soon. Bye-bye.